Well, good evening to all of you in the live chat. I'm Mike Wolf from db&w, and I'm really happy to see that many people online already. So I'll refrain from saying hello to every one of you, but good to see you. And as you might have seen in the notification, we have two raffles today. One is amongst all the patrons, and the other one is amongst everybody who is in the live chat. So if you want to participate in that, make sure that you leave at least one comment, because we'll have a bot that basically goes to everybody who's commented, and one of you is going to get a free license of any db&w plugin of choice. I hope the viewing works. Tim seems to have problems. And I also have one problem here, that there is one too many instances of YouTube running, because I can actually hear myself, which I shouldn't do. Let me just find that, turn it off, and then we can continue. Probably this one. Okay, found it. Yeah. All right. So the plugin of the month for November 2019 that you have voted for was the depth of field helper. And we're actually very, very far in development there. So I'll just show you how it works so far. And if you have any questions or any suggestions, feel free to add them in the chat, or just use our Discord channel as well. So this is the scene from the 2019 content. And so far, this is the normal camera as you see it when you select it. Now, the depth of field helper is a master plugin, which will end up in here. So you can either add it here as the db&w DoF Helper, or there is going to be a menu configuration that gives you a subsection for it, and you can just add it here as well. And you see it adds it automatically to the scene. So I'll close this window. What this allows you to do is basically set the settings on how the depth of field should be displayed. As you can see right now, I've got the camera selected, but it hasn't really changed anything that's being displayed here. That's because you actually need to enable depth of field for the camera first. So I'll go to the camera properties, depth of field, activate it, and bam, it starts to draw something. What we see in the perspective views is, if I just zoom a bit closer, maybe turn this into a perspective camera. There we go. Is that centered? Shouldn't be. There we go. Is the helper now draws a near and a far plane, as it should be for the selected camera. And basically, this defines the volume where everything is going to be in focus. Now, the volume depends on the focal point, or the focal distance. Go to camera settings. It depends on the focal distance, on the f-stop, and also on the render resolution, because what the volume shows is basically the volume where there is still going to be some blur, but the blur is smaller than 1 pixel in the final image. So if I lower the resolution here to something like 640/480, you will notice that these two planes are now further apart. If I go back to 1280/720, they're closer. If I increase the resolution to something like, I don't know, 4K, they're even closer. That's because for this f-stop and this focal distance, the pixel size is just going to be so much smaller that you will see more blurriness. All right, let me just switch it back to a more sensible resolution for this. And as you can see right away, something is working in the background. It also shows 5 handles, which are these circles here, which can be a bit tiny. And the middle circle allows you to change the focus or focal distance. The circles to the left and to the right of the focal distance are essentially the same. They allow you to directly manipulate the f-stop, and you can see that change down here as well. So as I move these, the f-stop changes. As I move the one in the middle, the focal distance changes. And yes, exactly. Mike's right. Where is it? Oh, come on. Is it in the properties? No, it should be. There we go. This frame size also affects the depth of field. Exactly. Yes. All right. So so far so good. The interesting part, and the part that took me the longest, is if you take the far left or the far right handle, that allows you to only move the near or the far plane that's in focus, while keeping the other plane where it is. So it effectively changes the focal distance and the f-stop at the same time to allow you to really pick the volume that you want to have in focus. So if I take the right hand, let me just make this actually bigger. Come on. This is 1080p, we can make this bigger. If I move the right handle, you will see them only moving the near plane. But if you look at the camera down here, you will notice that the focal distance and the f-stop both change. And you can do that with the other plane as well. So if I actually want to set like a volume that's in focus around that dragon, I could just, set my far plane, set my near plane, and I'm done. That's it. So these are the features that you have in the perspective or the orthographic views. And if you think that's a bit too cluttered with all the text labels there, you can turn those off. And if you don't like the grid on the near and far plane texture, you can turn that off as well. And this is actually supposed to be, I know this takes the direct color here, and you can use the near color and the far color to actually change how these are being rendered. And you can even change the transparency of the different planes if you want to. So that's the display of near and far planes. You can also just display the focus plane, which is where your focus is. And you have a simple volume, which is basically a box that encompasses the area that's going to be in focus. And I just noticed that it's actually not completely right down there. So hey, actually no, it is, because it intersects the ground, because that's being rendered as a 3D object in the scene as well. So that is correct. It's just going into the ground. And you have the option of just a simple view, which is just wireframe, and turn it off. But the one I like the most is the near and the far planes with the grid. And you can shade the grid as well, as you can see. So that's for the select display. And if I now select an object, like the dragon, you will see that the camera doesn't display anything. And here again, you have the option of choosing how you want to visualize a camera that is actually not selected at the moment. So you might just want it to show a focus plane or something, and maybe a near and far plane when you select it. Or you might just want it to show a simple wireframe bounding box, or maybe nothing at all, depending on how you work on your scene. But let's say you want to position something so it fits within your within the volume that's in focus, then you can just take the unselected camera and use a simple display or near and far planes display, and then move your object so it's in focus. But I'll just keep it simple right now. All right, so these are essentially, as Miranda said, yep, the visibility helpers and the controls you have. And the interesting thing is, if I go to a different, or I'm actually at a different frame, and it doesn't really matter where I set either of them. If I go back to the camera, you will notice that nothing is animated here, even though I've got auto key on. The thing is, there's actually, from what I found, no way to enable the animation envelopes for the focal distance or for the lens f-stop. So what the plugin does, it tries to it looks at the current camera and checks if there's actually an envelope attached to the focal distance or the f-stop. If no envelope is attached, then it just changes the setting, and that changes the settings for every frame. But if you start to animate it now, like such, now I've got an envelope attached to it called focal distance, and I do have the auto key set to something that actually does set a key. Then if I move the focus, it creates a keyframe. Not the wrong position, but it just actually, no, this just slipped over here. Move the camera. And now you can just animate your focus. And the same is true for the lens f-stop as well. So if you have an envelope on that, and as you can see here, it actually updated the envelope for the focal distance. And you want to get rid of it again, just press Shift on the envelope and you're back to the old behavior. That's, I think, a motion key there. Let's remove that. And then you're back to the old behavior and the animation is gone. All right. So those are the basic things I had in mind. And then somebody showed me the release video for Houdini 18, who's actually not online. And they have a feature where in a camera view, they also show the plane where the focus is. Now, basically what you have here, if you have the display in camera focus and the allow depth picking setting on, display in camera focus is this white semi-transparent plane that's placed in the scene at the distance from the camera where the current focus is. And on the top left here, you have this small icon which you can click on. It's a bit faint, and the problem is that the overlay on the right and the left-hand side that frames the camera is actually drawn on top of that. I can't really make it any brighter because I've got a black overlay, and the black overlay just darkens it automatically. So yeah, sorry for that. And basically, if you activate this, then you can just pick anywhere and place the focus there for the current frame or for all frames if there's no animation. Now, the first time you do that, depending on which items are actually underneath the mouse cursor, Lightwave will have to compute an internal acceleration structure because I'm basically ray tracing a ray into the mesh using the Lightwave SDK. And to do that effectively, Lightwave creates this acceleration structure, which is being used for ray tracing as well. This is a fairly heavy mesh. So when I click now, there's going to be a delay. So I'm just clicking. Wait, acceleration structure, still calculating. Come on, hurry up. Okay, done. Now, it basically picked the point that I selected and put the focal plane there. If I go to the camera properties, you will see that we've got the new focal distance here. The thing is, though, now the acceleration structure has been computed by Lightwave and is being reused. So if I click again, it's instantaneous. And you can just pick where you want your focus to be. Now, where this doesn't work is if you're selecting instances, because they don't actually exist as items that can be ray traced this way. And also if you have multiple meshes in your scene, multiple different objects, um, then what the plugin does, it first checks the picking ray, which is basically I'm basically casting a ray from the current camera position through my cursor position into the scene. I first check for all the meshes in the scene and see if it intersects their bounding boxes. And only if it actually intersects the bounding boxes do I ask Lightwave to raycast the ray. So that speeds up things tremendously because it doesn't have to raycast against every item that's in the scene, but only every item where the bounding box intersects my probing ray. The kind of downside, I suppose, is if you're going to a different frame that shows different items, you might again have a delay the first time you pick, because all of a sudden it might has to raycast into an item that it hasn't raycast into before, so it has to create the acceleration structure, yada yada yada. Also to preserve memory, because those acceleration structures do use memory. They are basically kept in memory as long as the picking mode is active. And you will also notice if I'm in the picking mode and I click somewhere, it just picks all the time. Now it's actually selected something else. Haha, yeah, there we go. That wasn't supposed to happen. And the acceleration structure is still there. If you deselect the picking mode, it will actually tell Lightwave that, okay, now it's safe to clear those acceleration structures from memory. So if I activate it again and start picking, oh no, there's no delay. I might have actually left that out. So yeah, it does actually keep them in memory. And no, you can't pick through transparent surfaces because it doesn't actually know that they're transparent. So, I mean, I could go in and start evaluating things. If there is a scene with multiple items, what it basically does internally, it raycasts into every item where the bounding box intersects the ray. And if it's multiple items, then it just takes the closest one. So, I mean, theoretically, you could even do stuff like if I click on here, for example, it hits the dragon. It also hits the ground plane behind it. I could, when you click, add a, show a pop-up that says, okay, do you actually want to use the dragon item or the ground item? Problem is that since we can't really use shortcuts in this context, like a control click or shift click, it would need to be an extra mode. And it would also be different from actually checking for transparencies, because in that case, I would really need to evaluate the surface for that polygon at that point where it intersects, maybe go through all the light wave nodes and the shading, which might not even work in that context, and then just evaluate if it's transparent, maybe below a threshold or something, and that makes it very, very difficult. I do get other information back. I know which mesh I've hit, obviously, because I'm just testing against one mesh. I know which polygon I've hit. I know the local coordinates. There's a few information like that that you get from Lightwave. And yeah, you do have to. I mean, it depends on the mesh. If it's like a low poly mesh, I'm not sure how big this one is. Let me just quickly check. But yeah, okay, that was a delay for 2.3 million polygons. that we just had once I started picking here. So if your meshes aren't all 2.3 million polygons, then it should be faster. And yes, you do get more information back. Let me just quickly, you know what, I've got the code here. I can look at it. So basically, you know what, I can even show it here. Increase the font size a bit. That should be big enough. So this is where I actually query for them. This is where raycast. And I've got my raycast info, which is something that's native to the Lightwave SDK. And Lightwave gives you information such as, come on. Yeah, there we go. I know the polygon, I know the hit point as a coordinate. That's in world coordinates, I think. I know the distance. I have a mesh ID. I know which the three closest vertices are. And I know their weights, which are used for UV interpolation. And I know the items. So I could probably do, you know, a very simplistic surface query, but yeah, that would be tricky with the transparencies. And then you also have the problem, you know, how do you toggle it and things like that. I would have to add even more buttons to the user interface, really. Yes, I would still have to hit the surface for transparency. The thing with Octane, um, natively it doesn't, from what I understand. I saw parts of a video on YouTube where somebody was basically linking the camera properties, at least the focal distance, I'm not sure about the f-stop, to the, what's it called, the thin film imager or something like that in Octane. So if you link them and Octane uses the envelopes that these two use, then it will pick them up. But yeah, if some of you, you know, are more experts with Octane, then feel free. Feel free to comment. But I saw something like that happen where the cameras were kind of synchronized. It would be nice if Octane picked those settings up, but currently it doesn't. Not natively, at least from what I've seen. Oh yeah, and also one thing with transparencies, Mike, is that the raycast only gives me the first intersection with the mesh. So if within that same mesh you actually want to pick something that is behind the transparency, then it won't pick that up either, because the raycast only gets the first intersection, whether it's transparent or not. All right, so that's essentially the current state of the depth of field helper. All of this works. And I think that the last bug that I fixed was that once this is turned off, previously, if you clicked at the camera view, nothing would happen. But now, once the picking is off, you can still rotate your camera and navigate around the scene as you used to. And when the picking is on, obviously you can't because you're actually picking. So you have to toggle this up there. All right, so that's, hello Carm. That's what the depth of field helper does at the moment. I was thinking about one more way to visualize the volume, and that was, let me just switch wrong direction, this way. And that was basically something like the simple style, which is just the bounding box for the volume as a wireframe. But I was actually thinking about drawing a cross through the focus that goes to the edges of this volume. So basically, three lines along each one of the axes going through the focus, and just have that as an alternate way to visualize what the current focus is. If any of you know of an example in Octane on how to link the cameras up, if you have any samples or any links to videos or stuff like that, I'd be really, really happy to get those, because then we can put them in the wiki and just improve the documentation for people that use Octane, because the only thing that we have here is the demo version, and that kind of doesn't get us that far. Yeah, so this is the depth of field helper. And I think it is, except maybe for the new visualization style, it is fairly feature complete. Might be one or two small tweaks here and there, but that's essentially what it does. And since this week there was also the hashtag Thank You Patrons Day, we would like to use the opportunity to thank all of our patrons for supporting us. I mean, we've been doing this for 12 years. It's gone way beyond our expectations as far as interaction with the patrons is concerned. I think it's really helpful for us as well as for the patrons to be that close to development in both directions, to get feedback early from you guys, especially on Discord, where we like to post screenshots or videos of stuff that's work in progress, just to see what your reactions are, if you have any ideas, if we're missing something. And the feedback that we get from you guys is amazing as well. I know that some of you really, really love the open approach to development, and the fact that you get to see behind the scenes the kind of thought processes that go into designing a plugin and the kind of problems that come up and have to be solved. And that gives you a better understanding of how the development works. And yeah, as John just said, we're super happy with all the interactions. The only problem is, of course, that we would like more than 60 patrons or 61. But other than that, we're super happy. So thanks to all the patrons for supporting us. And since this is the Thank You Patrons Month, we decided, and that's the surprise for today, to give you a new plugin. And just like we did last Christmas, I think, we ported another one of the OSL shaders that Zap Anderson has developed for Macs, which are open source. And what you will get with the next binary that's being sent out is a weave shader. And this is a really, really simple test scene. And what the weave shader essentially does is, let me just zoom a bit closer, because this is just a sphere primitive, is it renders weaves procedurally. And let me just show you the node tree for this. So I've got a normal principled BSDF material. I've got a spherical projection. The weave shader does need a projection. And has the options for, let me just actually isolate this. There we go. So you have a background color, which is the color behind the weave. You have a scale, which is basically a scale on top of the U and V tiles in the projection. You can use like this. You can color the different strands, and there's also inputs for all of these parameters, node inputs, except for the random seed. You can change the width of the individual strands. There you go. Opacity fade is only active if you actually use the opacity fade output in the node. I'll show that later. And what it also allows you to do, it basically perform some pseudo shading on the weaves or on the strands. So as you can see right now, they're quite flat, and you can actually let it compute a pseudo roundness on top of them. I'll turn this to 100%. You will see that they have some kind of shading that makes them look roundish. And you can also change how much that actually shades, that round shadow actually shades the fibers. Again, that is fake, but it looks fairly decent. It's more like less of a shadow, more of an occlusion, I suppose. You can also change how the the strands cast a shadow onto each other. Again, that's super fake. That's like 100%, and that's way too much. But I think at around 50%, no, even less, 30%, it starts to get a bit realistic. Then you have Fritz value, which basically jitters them, and a bendiness, and they kind of work together. And to be quite honest, I've ported this, but I haven't really explored the parameters that much. So there isn't that much I can tell you about how they work. Oh, yeah, bendiness basically jitters the fibers in relation to each other. So at 100%, you get something that's a bit more random. No, it doesn't affect speculators. No. It's just a color shader, really. But maybe at 10% or so, you get a little bit of randomness in the placement, but not that much. And I think the Fritz is kind of related to that. But what I will have to do is basically create like a series of tests where I just change one parameter and see what happens. But yeah, that is going to be the thank you patrons shader again in the next binary. And yeah, let's have a look at the outputs. The ID doesn't really work at the moment, but one thing that you can use is the opacity fade, which is essentially like a clip. So if I put that into the clip input, you see that it starts to clip out everything that isn't a strand at the moment. So you can basically use that to layer. But another way to layer is to just connect something to the background color input. But you could use the opacity fade to add some sheen, like I did right now, or to layer two materials. Essentially, have one material that you're using for the weave, and then another material that you're using for anything that's underneath it. So yeah, you certainly could with the opacity fade, which is essentially, if I just put that into the color here, which is essentially just this. It's a mask. And you also have a displacement output, and to show that, I'm actually going to go to another scene. There's actually no bump output, because at this point I'm not really sure on how to compute it. Bruce, I will send you a link. We have a Dropbox-like file server, which is where you get all of the Patreon plugins, and you can actually upload data there as well. I'll send you a link, and then you can upload it there, and I'll see what I can do with it and how I can distribute it. All right. So, or Discord, if they're less than, I think, 8 megabytes or something, that would work as well. All right. What we have here is I'm actually using the displacement output to displace the procedural sphere, the primitive sphere. And if we move in a bit closer, you will notice that this actually gives you quite a nice, yeah, it's a bit slow. So it gives you quite a nice proper 3D view. The problem is actually, I don't think you can render primitives as double-sided, because if I turn it on, it doesn't change anything. Yeah, but this is essentially what happens if you use it as a displacement. Um, of course, it's not going to work too well from all angles. As you can see here, it starts to break up because obviously it's just one sphere and one height value. Um, but it gives you an idea of how the whole thing is being computed. And for example, if I turn the roundness to 0%, then you will actually get flat strands here. So yeah, I mean, to be fair, I've pretty much just tested this on the sphere so far. But you will be able to play with that very soon and get your hands on it. And it does work as a 2D procedural. So essentially, if you don't have a projection connected to it, then it won't compute anything. It needs that projection, whether it's from UVs or if it's just an implicit one. And yes, it will, of course, work on a regular surface as well. Yep. So yeah, that is the Thank You Patrons plugin for this month. And I think we're pretty much through with what we have developed for you guys so far. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask now, because that allows me to quickly check if we actually got any new patrons in the last half hour. No, we didn't. Nope. Well, I'll tell you what. Is there anybody in the chat who has not seen the spline tools yet? Oh, you haven't. Well, there you go. So let's see. Steph. He's seen my splines. All right. Um, basically, what the spline tools are they're a multi-month project to get proper Bezier splines with an editor, as well as spline animation, spline displacement, spline rendering, etc. into Lightwave. So and it's a multi-step project, because what we try to do is basically write modules that are self-contained that you can at least use for something, and then build on top of those in the consecutive months, so that eventually we will have a full toolkit of splines, but on the other hand, still have something every month for the patrons that they can actually work with, as opposed to having to wait for half a year just to get the whole thing at once. So what we basically have is we have a spline primitive, which is a primitive like the sphere I just used to show the weave. And you have a button to add one, just looks like an old object. And then you can open the spline editor, which has a nice menu here. Let me just go to a different viewport. There we go. And you can just click and drag, and it starts drawing a spline. You have all the handles that you used to from Bézier's. To edit it, you have the handles on the points that allow you to either move on all three axes at the same time or just on a specific one, like such, or even just in a plane. um, there is right-click menus. Let me just, there we go. It draws a shadow of the spline that you're editing along the three major axes as you're editing it. And you have options to break up the way that the handles work with each other. Currently they're linked. If I turn off link and I just move one of them, the other one doesn't move. So I can make it a hard corner, and I can link them again and then move both control points together. You have the option to take any of these points and have them follow an item. So I can take this, right click, follow item, and just select my camera. And now that point is going to my light. And now if I take the light and move it, I have to drop the tool, then it will actually follow the light. But there we go. It should actually do that interactively. Looks like there's a bug. So that one point, that one part of the spline is actually going to follow the light all the time. If I go back to the spline editor, right click again and remove the item follow, and then I can just move it as I want to. You can also right click and animate all the control points with proper envelopes like you would do with items in Lightwave. Now the interesting thing is that none of these points or the spline is not really visible natively by Lightwave. It's just something that's internal to the spline primitive. And one of the ways to communicate with something that's external to it is to follow an item, or to, if you animate something manually, you right click on it, go to animate, and then you can open it in the graph editor, and you have proper envelopes for the position of that spline knot. So if I go to a different frame and move it, you will see, wrong shortcut, I think it's A. You will see that it creates keyframes just for that point in the envelope editor. Another option is you can also animate the whole shape of the spline. So basically, that's like using poses for the spline, where you can reorder them, you can name them, and then you have an envelope that you drive to access specific poses in time. A bit like morphs, essentially. So yeah, that's spline tool. There's lots more stuff in there. Like for example, you can automatically smooth a spline knot, and even have the smoothing automatic while it animates. So this one has automatic smoothing now. So the in and out control points always adjust every frame to keep the transition through that point as smooth as possible. You can also make it linear automatically, so whatever happens, wherever it animates to, it tries to keep the transition on that knot linear. And then you have auxiliary plugins that allow you to evaluate the spline in a nodal context, or attach an item motion of something to the spline. For example, let me just take the camera. There we go. There's a modifier called spline motion. I can select my spline. I have a displacement here that I'll set from 0% to 100% at frame 120. And its displacement type is going to be for the complete spline. And now the camera just moves along the spline. There is one node called proximity shading, or proximity, which allows you to compute the distance to a specific spline. And you can use that like a gradient for shading or for displacements. Let me just see if I can find the sample scenes. Well, maybe at least the right content. Oh yeah, that's shape animation. So if I open the spline edit tool, you will see there's 3 shapes in this animation and an envelope that goes from 0 to 100 to 200%. So it shows the first, the second, and the third shape in the list. And the first shape is essentially this shape. The second shape is this one. And the right one is this one. And shapes allow you to basically reposition all the points without actually having to add envelopes to all of them. You just envelope the whole spline itself. Hey, I wasn't actually prepared to show the splines. And this one is quite nice. Hope it loads. Yep, there we go. And this one uses the proximity to the spline to color the surface. So let me just activate the OpenGL overlay. There we go. And here we have a node that essentially takes the distance of the spline to a certain part of that plane and uses that to in turn drive a gradient. And as you edit the spline, which might or might not work, let's see. Yeah, it does. But it doesn't like that. The gradient should adapt, but yeah, for some reason. I don't think it likes VPR being on here. But that essentially allows you to use the spline shape to drive displacements, colors, and things like that on surfaces. And the next steps are going to be 1 month where we're essentially going to just look at the existing tools, go over them, clean up, find missing bugs, optimize things, and add little tweaks and features. And once that has been done, the next big step will be displacements along splines. And then we'll see. I mean, there's plenty of ideas, like, for example, using spline or making splines renderable, using them to place instances, etc. So yeah, that's all there is really. And there is actually no secret raffle word, believe it or not. We're just going to pick everybody who's in the chat. As long as you said anything in the chat, you're in the raffle. And if you're a patron, you're actually in 2 raffles. And let me just check. Ooh, Bruce, welcome. And thank you for supporting us. All right, Bruce is into raffles now as well. And actually, Dagmar is in the other room, and we've got the door closed so she doesn't get confused to me talking here and talking with a delay on YouTube. And she's, on the chat. And when I just mentioned Bruce, I heard her laugh through the closed door. Yeah, everybody says hello now. Amazing. All right. So, yeah, I mean, we have 23 three viewers at the moment. I don't think we've ever had that many. And I suppose as a proper YouTube channel, what we should say is don't forget to hit the subscribe and button and click on the bell. Even 25, amazing. All right, so I think we're going to start with the raffle for the patrons, which might mean that some of you won't get anything, but hey. We will announce the name and we will contact whoever has won that free license of any of our plugins. We'll contact them directly via Patreon because we have their email addresses and everything, and we'll just send them a message. And I've got the whole list here. Bruce has been added to the list. So let's click the button. I'm actually not going to show it in public because there's a massive list of names that I don't really want to disclose. All right. Pressing the button. Actually, whoever wins gets to pick what they want. And the winner from the patrons is David Giancuso. Was it David Giancuso? I have no idea. But I will certainly write down that name, take a screenshot, save it. And congratulations if you're on live. If you're not on live, congratulations anyhow, even if it's a bit later. So yeah, that's the first raffle. And let's see if this YouTube random comment picker actually works. Because I'm not sure if it works with live chat. But let's see. Oh, okay, this one doesn't. Brilliant. That's great. I suppose in the worst case, we will be announcing a winner later. But let me just quickly Google, and you guys think of some questions you can ask us while you listen to me clicking on my keyboard. Oh yeah, I would just I would basically just write down the names in a list and then run that through through one of those random pickers out there. But yeah, it looks like some certainly have a problem with live chats. Because yeah, it doesn't work. this one. The plugins that are part of being a patron, there's actually quite a lot of them. The link is, let me just quickly make sure, actually I'll just type it in. Actually, no, let me just make sure it's the right one. We have a massive list of them in our wiki. And there we go. You know, you can cash in your discount as many times as you want to for as many plugins as you want to. The only thing that makes a difference is for how long you have been a patron. And yes, that is one of the perks of being a patron. You get a 1% discount for every month that you have been with us, for up to 12%. And that's for every purchase that you make. So let's see. Yeah, it seems like all the tools are really, really happy to work with the normal chats, but not with the live chat. Actually, this might work. Yep, that's 12% for you. Ah, there we go. So just give me 1 more minute to see if that works. And if it doesn't, we'll just do it manually and then get back to you. So let's see. Hmm. Nope. It looks like I can't find a way to do it. At least not one that allows for the live chat. which is a bit of a pain. They all like to use the normal chat, but when it comes to the live chat, they're a bit yeah, they're very limited. So yeah, sorry for that. But Dogma is actually writing down the list. I mean, it's only 20 something people, so you just need to copy paste, and it's all right. And it would be nice if there was actually something in YouTube that would help you with that. But unfortunately, there isn't. What's next for voting on? It will be the plugins that didn't make it last time, which is the was the fog. We had the UV translate tool, and we also had one more. But I actually can't recall at the moment. And well, not spline rendering, um, but the next thing we will have we will have a spline toolkit back, but this time it will be basically a I suppose a cleanup cycle on the spline toolkit. So basically, I will need your feedback for that on issues on stuff that doesn't work the way it should, or things that where small improvements could add something. Like for example, being able to define the distance on a spline as opposed to percentage. And yeah, the vote is always in the first week of the month, so usually up until the 10th or so. And well, I was actually going to introduce that if no vote wins, I get to pick, but that would be mean. I mean, in the end, it would just make all of you equally unhappy. I mean, I suppose it's fair, but yeah, yeah. I would probably win every week. Yes. Hmm. Well, fun is certainly a part of it. I mean, eventually we do hope to have more than 61, actually no, 62 patrons, thanks to Bruce. Um, so, the idea is maybe to get that into a region where it's a bit more sustainable than it is now. Um, and initially the tools which we gave out for free were kind of, something that was for fun and also to basically just try out stuff. Try out code, try out ideas, things like that. And since some of them were just written in a couple of hours, you couldn't really turn them into products, but you could at least release them because they're useful. So that was where they originally come from. And with the Patreon, one reason we're doing this is basically to try out different ways to develop and interact with users. And I think that's also um, biggest benefit we have from that, because we're finding that, being open during development, being showing stuff like development streams, Q&A streams, um, showing plugins as they're being developed in progress with screenshots on the Discord and everything, um, helps us in focusing when you're developing, and also in checking possible issues with users as early as possible before you maybe even start coding, or as you've coded the first version. Just check back with users as quickly and as early as possible. And on the other hand, we found that many of our patrons really appreciate the fact that they actually have an insight on how something gets developed, and that they also have, if they wish to, early access to the development process to see what's happening there and maybe to be able to influence it. And so from the aspect of how we develop, how we interact with people, it's certainly going to influence further product development that we're going to do, even if it's not necessarily on Patreon. Um, of course, the money would always be nice, and yeah, we certainly would like more patrons, because if there's thousands of Lightwave users out there, I'm quite sure that there's more than 61 that make use of our plugins or could make use of them. Which is why we're also posting on every social media account that we can find. And if I would get beta access to Lightwave 2020 as a developer, I wouldn't be allowed to tell you. But it wouldn't be very smart by New Tech to not involve third-party developers in future developments. I'm not sure, Mike, but what's going to be worse if people get lens cap, or everybody's at discount gets reset back to 0%? But it's not Australia where you have mandatory voting. Ooh, we have a list. We have a list. That is amazing. If you know how to use emoticons, give Dogma a round of applause, please. Because now we're going to find out which of the people that are actually in the chat won. And Dogma has to send it to me. Nee. Well, I should get it any second now. I mean, it just needs to be transferred from the office next door to this one. Ah, there it is. Download, open, copy, paste, no time to waste. Stephen Dixon, what do you mean with the survey says? All right, we have a list. And maybe I shouldn't paste into it, but copy out of it. All right, let's click start. And the winner is Michael Stetson. Drum roll indeed. Yeah, I should have done this. But yeah, congratulations, Michael. You have won a free license of your choice of any of your products. Any of our products. I'm actually not sure if there is one that you don't have yet. So well, we could make it a C++ version of LensCap. That's much faster to render a black picture because the old one was just an L script. Oh, at least we're going to use vector extensions, so it's gonna scream. Yeah. So thanks to all of you for joining. It's been fun. Um, the problem is, if we have a raffle every month, then nobody's going to buy our plugins anymore, which isn't the point. Um, thanks all of you for joining. Thank you very much for being patrons, of course. Thank you very much for joining as a patron. At least those of you that just did in the past minutes. And as somebody once said, one last thing. The current build with the depth of field helper and the current state of Weave, just as you have seen it now, will be sent out to you in the next 10 minutes. I'm just running the script at the moment, just to update with the current patrons. And as soon as that's done, you will get your emails with your download links to get the current versions and play with it. The only thing we haven't done yet is there's only empty wiki pages for the for the new tools. So if you actually want to see how those work, you'll have to look at the video again. But other than that, you'll be able to play with it, and the documentation will be updated over the weekend. So yeah, that is basically it for now. Again, thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you for supporting us. And who knows? I mean, we might actually have a vote on Patreon to see if we shouldn't make the development stream public every time and just have the Q&A stream only for patrons. Just to get a bit more of a crowd, which I suspect is going to be more fun for you as well. John and your grubby little hands, let me just quickly check. Yeah, your mail just left the building. I'm just looking at the list right now of all the mails that go out. So thanks a lot. And yeah, have a nice evening, morning, whatever time zone you're in. And yeah, we'll see you next time. The scene is Dragon Copper Verdigris. It's a part of the 2019 content. I think the PBR subdirectory. So take care and thanks. Bye bye.